World, and Alison Sargent is back on set. Alison, good morning. Now, papers are responding, I should say that we're starting in South Korea this time round. Papers are responding to the rise in tension with North Korea as US Navy ships make their way to the Korean Peninsula.
That's right. North Korea issued a warning the other day in response to the U.S. deployment of those ships. You can see on the front page of Korean paper, the Junong Daily, North Korea tells U.S. it's ready for toughest action in the event of any aggression by the U.S. The paper calls these comments saber-rattling and says that they reflect the heightened tension and the possibility that North Korea will attempt another missile launch. Now, North Korea's saber-rattling, though, came in response to some saber-rattling from Donald Trump that suggested that the U.S. might consider carrying out a preemptive strike on North Korea. Now, the Korea Times today is really downplaying that possibility. You can see on its front page, they say concerns for armed conflict are overblown. The paper reports that Donald Trump's comments caused rumors of a war crisis to spread through social media in South Korea, but the paper cites military experts who say that the U.S. is unlikely to launch an attack out of fear from the reaction from China and Russia.
But that hasn't stopped the pro-government Chinese paper, the Global Times, from worrying that the nuclear crisis is reaching a showdown.
Yeah, in its editorial today, the paper says that the recent strike in Syria makes a U.S. strike against North Korea seem even more likely. The paper gives a very stern warning, actually, to its neighbor, North Korea, against aggravating the U.S. with a new missile test. They say more and more Chinese people are actually supporting the view that China should enhance sanctions over North Korea's nuclear activity. And so now North Korea may be losing some of its support, as we can see in China, but according to the Washington Post, actually, Kim Jong-un has a very loyal friend in Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. The Washington Post reports that the two leaders have been sending each other messages commemorating various anniversaries. So the Washington Post says that the relationship between the two countries is nothing new, but that these new threats from Donald Trump have really caused the two leaders to form an even tighter bond.
Well, the Syrian president will, of course, be a topic of conversation in Moscow today as the US Secretary of State visits Moscow. But there's another topic that rights groups are hoping that the US Secretary could bring up with Russian officials. Tell us more.
Yeah, that's reports of violent persecution against gay men in the Russian region of Chechnya. Now, at least 100 men are believed to have been arrested, tortured, and kept in secret prisons by Chechen authorities on suspicion of being gay. And this was first reported by a Russian opposition paper at the beginning of the month, and you can read about it today again in Le Monde. Now, these reports are denied by the Chechen leader, who says that gay people can't be repressed in Chechnya because they don't exist there. Now, since word has gotten out, activists have been mobilizing. They are not convinced by this defense. Many are calling specifically today, actually, on Rex Tillerson to raise the issue during his trip to Moscow. And the Huffington Post also reports that rights activists in London are planning to protest today outside of the Russian embassy.
OK, well, papers across the world are continuing to react to the story of that man who was dragged off the United Airlines plane.
So as we saw in the business report, that video sparked a reaction worldwide, and in particular in China, where the video was actually viewed some 330 million times. That's according to the Hong Kong-based South China Morning Post. The paper says that the incident was viewed in China as having been motivated really by racial discrimination. Now, that passenger was Vietnamese American, not Chinese American, as some initial reports said, but that didn't stop 38,000 internet users in China from signing a Chinese Lives Matter petition asking the U.S. government to further investigate the incident. Meanwhile, in the U.S., the New York Times also devotes its editorial to the incident today with a different angle. They say that it was, in a way, an extreme case of just how terrible flying has become, from being poked and prodded at security to being crammed into ever-shrinking seats. The New York Times says that as long as big airlines face neither rigorous competition nor a government watchdog, they will be able to treat customers like chattel and get away with it.
OK, and finally, the White House press secretary, Sean Spicer, is once again under fire for comments that he made comparing the Syrian president to Hitler.
That's right. He said even Hitler did not use chemical weapons in World War II. Sean Spicer made this statement to justify U.S. airstrikes in Syria. It drew condemnation, and many people pointed out that it's not even really true. even if Hitler didn't use chemical weapons on the battlefield, he oversaw the most lethal use of chemical weapons in history. And the magazine, Spicer made things even worse, actually, than when he tried to explain his comments. He ultimately ended up making an apology hours later. You can read all about it in The Atlantic today. And the magazine points out that these comments were especially poorly timed since they came in the midst of Passover, which is a Jewish holiday celebrating liberation from slavery in Egypt.
Okay, poorly timed. Alison, thank you very much for that. Alison Sargent there with the International Press Review.